My teenage son has been sleeping in his car instead of his bedroom, and I just discovered what's been happening in our house at night. I found my son sleeping in his Toyota at 3 in the morning on a Wednesday in late October. I had gotten up to use the bathroom and noticed his bedroom door was open with the light off. I walked down the hallway and looked inside. His bed was made perfectly, untouched. I checked the bathroom, the basement, even the backyard. Then I saw him through the kitchen window, curled up in the back seat of his car in our driveway. I grabbed my robe and went outside barefoot on the cold concrete. I knocked on the window and he jerked awake, his face pale in the dim glow of the streetlight. He looked terrified when he saw me. I opened the door and asked what he was doing out here. He said he couldn't sleep inside. I told him to come in the house right now, but he shook his head. He said he felt safer in the car. Safer from what? I asked. He wouldn't answer. He just pulled the blanket tighter around himself and turned away from me. I stood there in the cold for 5 minutes trying to get him to talk, but he refused. Finally, I went back inside and watched him from the window until the sun came up. My son's name is Derek. He's 16 years old, and until 3 months ago, he was a normal teenager. He played basketball, got decent grades, had friends over on weekends. Then something changed. He started coming home from school and going straight to his room. He stopped eating dinner with us. He stopped talking to his younger sister. My husband Richard said it was just teenage moodiness, that Derek would grow out of it, but I knew something was wrong. A mother knows. Derek started looking exhausted all the time, like he wasn't sleeping. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. He lost weight. When I asked if everything was okay at school, he said everything was fine. When I asked if someone was bullying him, he said no. When I asked if he was using drugs, he got angry and told me to stop interrogating him. Richard told me to back off and give Derek space. So I did. I gave him space for 2 months while he deteriorated in front of me, and then I found him sleeping in his car. The next morning at breakfast, Derek came inside looking like he hadn't slept at all. His hair was messy and his clothes were wrinkled. His sister Lily asked why he was sleeping in the car, and he told her to shut up. Richard slammed his coffee mug down and said Derek needed to watch his tone. Derek grabbed a granola bar and left for school without another word. Richard looked at me and said we needed to do something about Derek's attitude. I said his attitude wasn't the problem. Something was making him afraid to sleep in his own room. Richard said I was being dramatic. He said Derek was probably just going through a rebellious phase and sleeping in the car was his way of acting out. I asked why a teenager would act out by making himself uncomfortable and cold. Richard didn't have an answer for that. He finished his coffee and left for work. I sat at the kitchen table and thought about Derek's face when he woke up in the car. He looked genuinely terrified. That afternoon, I left work early and came home before anyone else. I went up to Derek's room and looked around. Everything seemed normal. His bed was neatly made. His desk was organized. His basketball trophies lined the shelf. I opened his closet and checked through his clothes. Nothing unusual. I looked under his bed and found some old comic books and a shoebox full of birthday cards. I checked his dresser drawers. All normal. I was about to leave when I noticed his window. The lock was broken. The latch hung loose and the window could slide open easily. I pushed it and it moved without any resistance. I looked outside at the roof of the garage below. Someone could climb up there and get into Derek's room through this window. My stomach dropped. I checked the window again. The lock hadn't just broken naturally. Someone had forced it. There were small scratches around the frame where something had pried it open. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of everything. I called Richard at work and told him about the window. He said it probably broke months ago and we just never noticed. I told him about the scratches and he said maybe Derek broke it himself by accident. I asked why Derek would break his own window lock and Richard said he didn't know, but he was in the middle of something and we could talk about it later. I hung up and called a locksmith. He came an hour later and looked at the window. He said someone definitely forced it open from the outside. He could install a new lock and add a security bar. I told him to do both. While he worked, I went through the house checking every window and door. Everything else was secure. Only Derek's window had been tampered with. The locksmith finished and gave me the bill. I paid him, and then I sat on Derek's bed and waited for him to come home from school. I needed to know what was happening. I needed to know who had been trying to get into his room. Derek came home at 4 and found me sitting on his bed. He dropped his backpack and asked what I was doing in his room. I told him I found his broken window lock. His face went completely white. I asked him how long it had been broken, and he said he didn't know. I told him the locksmith said someone forced it open from outside. Derek sat down on his desk chair and put his head in his hands. I asked if someone had been trying to break in. He nodded without looking at me. I asked how many times, and he said he wasn't sure. Maybe 4 or 5 times over the past few months. I felt my chest tighten. I asked why he didn't tell me, and he said he didn't think I would believe him. I asked who was trying to break in, and he said he didn't know. He said he would wake up in the middle of the night and hear someone on the garage roof. He would hear them trying to open his window. He started sleeping with a baseball bat next to his bed. Then one night, about 3 weeks ago, he woke up and the window was open. Someone had gotten it unlocked and slid it up about 6 inches before Derek woke up and yelled. The person ran away. After that, Derek couldn't sleep in his room anymore. I asked Derek if he saw who it was and he said no. It was too dark and they were wearing a hood. I asked if he told his father and he said yes. He told Richard 2 weeks ago. Richard said Derek probably had a nightmare and imagined the whole thing. Derek tried to show him the window, but Richard said the lock was just old and loose. He said Derek was being paranoid and needed to stop watching scary movies before bed. Derek stopped trying to convince him after that. He just started sleeping in his car because at least he could lock all the doors. I felt rage building in my chest. My husband dismissed our son's fear, and now Derek had been sleeping in a car for weeks. I told Derek I believed him and I was going to figure out who was doing this. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and asked what if they came back. I told him the locksmith installed a new lock and a security bar. Nobody was getting through that window now. But I also told him I was going to call the police and file a report. I called the police non-emergency line and explained the situation. They sent an officer over that evening. His name was Officer Brennan, and he took Derek's statement. Derek explained about waking up and hearing someone on the roof, about the window being forced open, about seeing a hooded figure run away. Officer Brennan wrote everything down and then walked around the outside of our house. He looked at the garage roof and noted how easy it would be for someone to climb up. He asked if we had any security cameras, and I said no. He strongly suggested we install some. He said without video evidence or a clear description of the intruder, there wasn't much the police could do besides increase patrols in our neighborhood. He gave me his card and told me to call immediately if anything else happened. After he left, Richard came home from work. I told him the police had been here and he looked annoyed. He asked why I involved the police over a broken window lock. I told him our son was being stalked by someone trying to break into his room and he had been sleeping in his car because he was terrified. Richard said I was overreacting and making Derek more anxious by treating this like a big deal. Richard and I had our first real fight in years that night. He said I was feeding into Derek's paranoia and that teenagers make up stories for attention. I said Derek had no reason to make this up and his fear was obviously real. Richard said Derek probably broke the window himself and made up the story because he got caught sleeping in the car. I asked why any teenager would break their own window and sleep in a car for attention when they could just talk to us. Richard didn't have an answer. He said I was babying Derek and needed to let him handle his own problems. I said Derek tried to tell him and Richard dismissed him. Richard's face turned red and he said he wasn't going to argue about this anymore. He went to bed and I slept on the couch. The next morning he left for work without saying goodbye. Derek came downstairs and asked if we were fighting because of him. I told him this wasn't his fault. His father was wrong and I was going to make sure Derek was safe. I ordered security cameras online and paid extra for next day delivery. I also called my sister Monica, who worked in home security. She came over that afternoon and helped me set up cameras covering every angle of the house. We put one aimed directly at Derek's window and the garage roof. We put another at the front door, one at the back door, and one covering the driveway. Monica showed me how to access the footage on my phone and set up motion alerts. She said if anyone came near the house, I would get a notification immediately. I thanked her and she hugged me. She said she couldn't believe Richard wasn't taking this seriously. I said I couldn't either. That night, Derek slept in his room for the first time in weeks. He kept his door locked and his baseball bat next to the bed. I checked the camera feeds every hour. Nothing happened. The next night was the same. On the third night, I got a motion alert at 2:15 in the morning. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera app. Someone was climbing onto the garage roof. I could see a figure dressed in dark clothes and a black hood moving carefully across the roof toward Derek's window. My hands shook as I dialed 911. I whispered to the dispatcher that someone was trying to break into my house right now. She asked my address and I gave it to her. She said officers were on the way and to stay on the line. I ran to Derek's room and pounded on the door. He opened it looking confused and I told him someone was on the roof. His face went pale. I pulled him into the hallway and we went to Lily's room. I woke her up and told her to be quiet and stay with us. We huddled in her room with the door locked while I watched the camera feed on my phone. The figure was at Derek's window now, trying to open it. They pulled and pushed, but the new lock and security bar held. After about 30 seconds, they realized they couldn't get in. They turned and looked directly at the camera. Even with the hood, I could see it was a man based on his build. He stared at the camera for a few seconds, and then climbed down from the roof and disappeared into the darkness. 2 police cars arrived 5 minutes later. Officer Brennan was one of the responding officers. I showed him the camera footage and he watched it 3 times. He said this was clearly a targeted attempt and they needed to figure out who this person was and why they were after Derek. He asked Derek if he had any idea who would do this. Derek said he didn't know. He didn't have any enemies. He wasn't in any fights. He didn't owe anyone money. Officer Brennan asked if Derek had rejected anyone romantically, if there was a girl who might be obsessed with him. Derek said no. Officer Brennan asked about social media, if Derek had any online conflicts with anyone. Derek said he barely used social media. The other officer was outside examining the garage roof and the yard. He came back inside and said whoever it was knew the layout of our house well. They knew exactly which window was Derek's and the easiest way to reach it. This wasn't random. This was planned. Officer Brennan said they would review the footage and see if they could identify the person. He also said we should consider having Derek stay somewhere else for a few days until they figured this out. I said Derek could stay with my sister. Richard came out of our bedroom and asked what all the noise was about. I told Richard someone tried to break into Derek's room again, and the police caught it on camera. Richard looked at the officers and then at me. He asked to see the footage. I I showed him and watched his face change as he realized this was real. He asked Officer Brennan what they were going to do about it. Officer Brennan explained they would investigate and increase patrols, but in the meantime, Derek should stay somewhere else for safety. Richard nodded slowly. He looked at Derek and said he was sorry for not believing him. Derek didn't say anything. After the police left, Richard and I packed a bag for Derek. I called Monica and she said Derek could stay with her as long as he needed. We drove him over at 3 in the morning. Monica hugged Derek and told him he was safe now. On the drive home, Richard was quiet. Finally, he said he should have listened. He said he thought Derek was being dramatic and he was wrong. I told him we needed to focus on finding out who was doing this and why. Richard agreed. Neither of us could sleep when we got home. We sat in the living room watching the security camera feeds until sunrise. The next day, Officer Brennan called and said they couldn't identify the person from the footage. The hood and dark clothing obscured everything. They were going to canvass the neighborhood and see if anyone saw anything suspicious. He asked if we could think of anyone who had a reason to target Derek. I said we couldn't think of anyone. Derek was a good kid with no enemies that we knew of. Officer Brennan suggested Derek might know more than he was saying. Sometimes kids get involved in situations they're afraid to tell their parents about. He said we should sit down with Derek and have a serious conversation. I told him I would. That afternoon, I picked Derek up from school and brought him to a coffee shop. Just the two of us. I told him we needed to talk about what was happening. I needed him to be completely honest with me, even if he thought he would get in trouble. I promised I wouldn't be angry. I just needed the truth so we could fix this. Derek stared at his coffee cup for a long time before he started talking. Derek said there was something he hadn't told me. About 3 months ago, he was walking home from basketball practice. It was already dark, and he took a shortcut through the park. He saw a man sitting in a parked car near the playground. There was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing next to the car talking to the man through the window. Something about it felt wrong to Derek. The little girl looked uncomfortable. The man was leaning out the window trying to hand her something. Derek walked over and asked the girl if she knew this person. She said no, and that he had been asking her to get in his car. The man immediately started his car and drove away fast. Derek walked the little girl home and told her parents what happened. They called the police. The police took a report and got a description of the car and the man. Derek gave a statement. The detective called him a few days later and said they were investigating but hadn't found the man yet. They asked Derek to call if he saw the car again. That was 3 months ago. About a week after that, Derek noticed the same car parked on our street one evening. He wrote down the license plate and called the detective. The detective said they would look into it. Then the car started appearing more often. Always parked within view of our house. Always with the same man inside. Derek never saw his face clearly. I asked Derek why he didn't tell me any of this. He said he didn't want to worry me and he thought the police would handle it. Then the break-in attempts started and Derek realized the man was targeting him. Derek thought maybe the man was trying to scare him into not testifying if there was ever a trial, or maybe the man wanted to hurt him for interfering. Derek had been terrified for months but didn't know what to do. He thought if he told me, the man might escalate and hurt our whole family. I felt sick listening to this. My son had been protecting a little girl from a predator, and now that predator was stalking him. I asked if Derek had told the detective about the break-in attempts. He said no. He was afraid it would make things worse. I told Derek we were calling the detective right now. He gave me the detective's name, Detective Novak. I found the number and called from the coffee shop. Detective Novak answered, and I explained who I was and what had been happening to Derek. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Detective Novak said he needed to see the camera footage immediately. He said he would come to our house that evening. Detective Novak arrived at 6 with another detective named Detective Chen. I showed them all the camera footage from the attempted break-in. They watched it multiple times, pausing and zooming in on different parts. Detective Novak asked Derek to describe the car he had seen and the license plate number he wrote down. Derek gave them everything. Detective Novak's expression was grim. He said the license plate matched a person of interest they had been investigating for several months. His name was Alan Pritchard. He was 38 years old and had a history of child predation charges that never resulted in convictions due to lack of evidence or witnesses recanting their statements. The police suspected he had been targeting children in our area for over a year. Derek's intervention 3 months ago had likely saved that little girl from being abducted. Now Pritchard was retaliating against Derek. Detective Novak said this changed everything. They had been looking for evidence to arrest Pritchard, and now they had it. The attempted break-ins and stalking were serious crimes. They could arrest him immediately if they could locate him. The problem was Pritchard had disappeared after the last break-in attempt. His car was found abandoned 2 days ago. Detective Chen said they believed Pritchard knew the police were closing in, and he was getting desperate. That made him more dangerous. They needed to find him before he tried something else. Detective Novak asked if Derek would be willing to testify about everything he witnessed 3 months ago and everything that happened since. Derek said yes. He wanted this person stopped. Detective Novak said they would put protection on our house and Derek could come home from Monica's. They would have patrol cars watching the house around the clock. He also said we should be very careful and call immediately if we saw anything suspicious. Richard asked how long this would take, and Detective Novak said he couldn't give a timeline. They were actively searching for Pritchard, but he could be anywhere. I asked what would happen when they found him, and Detective Novak said he would be arrested and charged with multiple felonies. With Derek's testimony and the camera footage, they had a strong case. Pritchard would go to prison for a long time. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. Pritchard was still out there and he knew where we lived. Derek came back home the next day. Richard took time off work to be home during the day while I was at work. We had patrol cars parked outside at night. Lily was scared and asked why police were at our house. We told her someone had been bothering Derek, but the police were keeping us safe. She asked if the person was going to hurt us, and I told her no. The police would catch them soon. I didn't know if that was true, but I needed to believe it. Derek went back to school, but he was different now. He was constantly looking over his shoulder. He barely talked. He came straight home every day and stayed inside. Richard and I took turns being home, so Derek was never alone. Days passed without any sign of Pritchard. The police said they had alerts out everywhere. His picture was circulated to every department in the state. Someone would spot him eventually, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen. I started having nightmares about Pritchard breaking into our house. I would wake up and check the camera feeds. Richard was having trouble sleeping too. We were all on edge. 2 weeks after Detective Novak's visit, I was at work when my phone rang. It was Lily's school. The secretary said Lily never arrived at school that morning. My blood turned to ice. I said there must be a mistake. Richard dropped her off. The secretary said Richard never came to the school. I hung up and called Richard. He answered on the first ring. I asked where Lily was, and he said he dropped her off at school at 8 like always. I told him the school said she never arrived. There was silence. Then Richard said he watched her walk into the building. I told him to call the school and confirm. I was getting in my car and driving there now. I called Detective Novak while I drove and told him Lily was missing. He said he was sending officers to the school immediately. I got to the school and ran inside. Richard was already there talking to the principal. The principal said they checked all the classrooms and Lily wasn't in the building. They were reviewing security footage now. We went to the security office and watched the footage from that morning. Richard's car pulled up at 8. Lily got out and walked toward the entrance. Then a man stepped out from behind a parked car and grabbed her. It happened so fast. He put his hand over her mouth and dragged her to a van parked nearby. The van drove away. The whole thing took less than 10 seconds. I screamed when I saw it. Richard grabbed my arm to steady me. The principal called 911. I called Detective Novak back and told him what we saw on the footage. He said they were getting the van's license plate from the footage and putting out an Amber Alert immediately. Every officer in the state would be looking for that van. He asked if we could see the man's face in the footage. The principal rewound it and we looked closer. The man was wearing a hat and sunglasses, but his build matched the person from our security footage. It was Pritchard. He had taken my daughter. Detective Novak said officers were on their way to our house and the school. We needed to stay calm and let them do their jobs. Stay calm. My 8-year-old daughter had just been kidnapped by a predator and I was supposed to stay calm. Richard was pacing and running his hands through his hair. I sat down before my legs gave out. Police arrived within minutes. They took our statements and got copies of all the security footage. Detective Novak showed up 20 minutes later. He looked furious. He said they found the van abandoned 3 miles from the school. Pritchard had switched vehicles. They were searching the area, but so far there was no sign of him or Lily. Detective Novak asked if Pritchard had tried to contact us. I said no. He said Pritchard might call and make demands. If he did, I needed to keep him talking as long as possible so they could trace the call. I needed to sound calm and compliant. I needed to not provoke him. I said I would do whatever it took to get Lily back. Detective Novak said they had every available officer searching. They had helicopters in the air. They were checking every property Pritchard had connections to. They would find her. Richard asked how long that would take, and Detective Novak said he didn't know. Every minute counted in these situations. I felt like I was going to throw up. My baby girl was somewhere with a monster, and I couldn't do anything. Derek arrived with Monica. Someone had called him at school and told him what happened. He looked devastated. He said this was his fault. If he hadn't intervened 3 months ago, Pritchard wouldn't have targeted our family. I grabbed Derek's face and told him this was not his fault. He saved a little girl. He did the right thing. Pritchard was the monster. Derek started crying and I held him. Richard stood at the window watching the street as if Lily might just walk up the driveway. The police set up equipment in our living room to monitor our phones. We waited. My phone rang at 4 in the afternoon. Unknown number. Detective Novak motioned for me to answer and put it on speaker. I picked up and said hello. Pritchard's voice came through. He said he had my daughter, and if I wanted to see her again, I needed to do exactly what he said. I asked if Lily was okay, and he said she was fine for now. She was crying for me. Did I want to hear her cry? I said no. I asked what he wanted. He said he wanted Derek. He wanted me to bring Derek to an address he would text me. If I brought anyone else or called the police, he would kill Lily. I said okay. I would do whatever he wanted. Just please don't hurt her. He said I had 1 hour. He hung up. The address came through in a text message. Detective Novak was already tracing the call. He said it came from a burner phone somewhere in the industrial district. The address Pritchard sent was an abandoned warehouse in the same area. Detective Novak said this was a trap. Pritchard wanted Derek and he was using Lily as bait. We couldn't send Derek to him. Richard said we had to do what Pritchard said or he would kill Lily. Detective Novak said if we gave him Derek, he would kill both of them. We needed to let the police handle this. I looked at Derek. His face was white. He said he would go. He said he caused this and he had to fix it. I told him absolutely not. I wasn't trading one child for another. Detective Novak said they would send officers to the warehouse and surround it. They would get Lily out safely. Richard asked what if Pritchard saw the police and hurt Lily. Detective Novak said they would be careful, but we couldn't give in to his demands. I asked how long it would take to get officers in place, and Detective Novak said they were mobilizing now. They would be ready within 30 minutes. I asked what I should tell Pritchard when he called back. Detective Novak said to tell him I was on my way with Derek. That would buy them time. My phone rang again 15 minutes later. Pritchard asked if I was coming. I said yes. I was getting Derek and we would be there soon. He said I had 40 minutes left. I said I understood. He hung up. Detective Novak said officers were in position around the warehouse. They had snipers on nearby buildings. They could see into some of the windows. So far they hadn't spotted Pritchard or Lily. The plan was for them to move in once they confirmed Lily's location inside. I asked what if they couldn't find her in time. Detective Novak said they would. I had to trust them. 30 minutes passed. Detective Novak got a call and stepped outside to take it. He came back in looking tense. He said officers spotted movement inside the warehouse. They couldn't see clearly, but it looked like someone was in the back room. They were preparing to breach. Richard asked if they were sure Lily was in there, and Detective Novak said they were as sure as they could be. We needed to let them do their jobs. Another 15 minutes passed. Then we heard it on the police radio. Breach. Officers were going in. There was shouting and radio chatter. I couldn't understand what was happening. Then silence. Detective Novak held his radio and waited. Finally, a voice came through. Suspect in custody. Child located and safe. I collapsed onto the couch. Richard grabbed my arm. Derek was crying. Detective Novak said they were bringing Lily to the hospital to be checked out. We could meet them there. We ran to the car and Richard drove faster than I had ever seen him drive. We got to the hospital and ran inside. A nurse directed us to the emergency room. Lily was sitting on a bed wrapped in a blanket. She saw me and started crying. I ran to her and held her. She was shaking and crying, but she was alive. She was here. Richard hugged us both. Derek stood back crying. Lily reached out for him and he came over. She hugged him and said the bad man told her it was Derek's fault. Derek said he was so sorry. Lily said she wasn't mad at him. She knew it wasn't his fault. The doctor said Lily wasn't physically harmed. She was dehydrated and scared, but she would be okay. They wanted to keep her overnight for observation. Detective Novak arrived and said Pritchard was in custody and would be charged with kidnapping, attempted kidnapping, stalking, attempted burglary, and multiple other charges. With all the evidence and Derek's testimony, Pritchard would spend the rest of his life in prison. He said Derek was a hero. He saved that little girl 3 months ago, and his bravery led to Pritchard's capture. If Derek hadn't intervened, Pritchard would still be out there targeting children. Derek asked about the little girl from 3 months ago. Detective Novak said she was safe. Her family was grateful to Derek. Richard put his hand on Derek's shoulder and said he was proud of him. I was proud too. My son had done the right thing even when it put him in danger. That took courage. We stayed with Lily in the hospital room that night. Richard slept in the chair. Derek slept on the couch by the window. I sat next to Lily's bed and held her hand while she slept. I didn't sleep at all. I just watched her breathe and thanked God she was safe. We brought Lily home the next day. The police had finished processing our house and removed all their equipment. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal. Lily was quiet and clingy. She didn't want to be alone. She slept in our room for the next week. Derek went back to school, but I could tell he was struggling. He blamed himself for what happened even though everyone told him it wasn't his fault. Richard took a leave of absence from work to be home with the kids. I did the same. We needed time to heal as a family. Detective Novak called a week later and said Pritchard was being held without bail. The prosecutor was building a case and wanted Derek to testify at trial. Derek said he would. He wanted to make sure Pritchard never hurt anyone again. The trial happened 4 months later. Derek testified about what he witnessed in the park and everything that happened after. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Pritchard was sentenced to 40 years in prison with no possibility of parole. When the judge read the sentence, I felt something release in my chest. It was over. He couldn't hurt us anymore. Derek graduated high school 2 years later. He was accepted to college with a scholarship. He wanted to study criminal justice. He said he wanted to help protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Lily was doing well. She had nightmares for months after the kidnapping, but therapy helped. She was back to being a normal kid. Richard and I were okay. The experience had shaken us, but it also brought us closer. We learned to listen to our kids and trust them when they said something was wrong. Derek still checks the locks on his windows every night before bed. He probably always will, but he sleeps in his room now, not his car. And every time I see him walk through the front door, I remember how close we came to losing everything because one person saw evil and decided to stop it. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.